I'm kind of lucky now that I've achieved a higher level of freedom in my life at 44 than most people will ever really achieve in their lifetime. But when you talk about luck, I think luck can also be labor under correct knowledge. You can do things to engineer luck, if that makes sense.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Productive Insights podcast. This is Ash Roy, your host, and today's guest is Greg Kassar. Greg Kassar started selling online in 2003 after he left his full-time role in 2009, which was in IT in the corporate world. He left to run his own digital marketing agency, which specialized in traffic and conversion. Greg has invested over $250,000 in his education, has worked with 300 businesses and driven over 2 million leads. He's responsible for over $500 million in online sales and has worked with some online marketing greats who have previously been on this podcast, including Ryan Deiss in episode 170 and Ezra Firestone in episode 55. Greg is a master at performing split tests and has recently been doing a lot of work in the e-commerce space. So Greg has some great knowledge to share with us in terms of the various business models out there and what really lends itself to creating a life of freedom. So I'm delighted to welcome Greg Kassar from collective.com.au. Welcome, Greg.
Hey, Ash, thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Thanks.
We've known each other for many years. I've always found you to be stand-up guy. I was talking to another guy today, Guy Sohm, and he said, Ash, he always comes from just such a place of giving. So I think that's a true compliment that, people talk about you like that. So it's awesome what you're doing with the group here.
That's very kind, Greg. Thank you very much. And I was going to say that I've known you for about 5 years, and I can honestly say it's always been a pleasure. You're a very down-to-earth person and very approachable and very honest. So thank you.
So you're very welcome.
So, Greg, what we're going to talk about today is the different business models, particularly in the context of what we've seen happening of late, which is a little bit of a tectonic shift, if you like. Amazon seems to have come to the fore, and as Mike Rhodes said to me once, he talked about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and that was Amazon, Apple, Google, and Facebook. And we're now seeing some sort of maybe not a resurgence, but a progression of Amazon. There's a bit of a groundswell happening around that. And Greg, you were saying to me just before we started recording that by 9 a.m. in the mornings, you are pretty much free of all your commitments that you have to fulfill in order to be financially free every day. So Clearly the e-commerce thing has been serving you very well. You have recently talked about how you've built $1 million business within 12 months in annual revenue when I saw you speak at Superfast Business Live, which was hosted by our common friend, James Schramko. So let's start the conversation there. And why don't you tell us about how you see e-commerce evolving now and where do you see yourself in 2 years and how that's played a role in your journey so far?
Okay, cool. Well, there's a couple of questions there. So if I unpack that a little bit, one of the things, like, most people get into business as a way of creating, a lifestyle. But I think ultimately most people actually really seek freedom, whether that's the freedom of choice of who to hang out with, the freedom of where to live, the freedom of what to work on, that kind of thing. I'm kind of lucky now that I've achieved a higher level of freedom in my life at 44 than most people will ever really achieve in their lifetime. But when you talk about luck, I think luck can also be labor under correct knowledge. You can do things to engineer luck, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So yeah, like you mentioned, I've spent over $250,000 and I've been at it since 2003. So I'm like one of those guys where he got lucky, but I'm a 15-year overnight success or 16-year overnight success, that kind of thing.
Greg, I interviewed John McGrath, the founder of McGrath Real Estate. I think it was in episode 122. And he actually said, it takes 10 years to become an overnight success. That is so well said.
Yeah, it's very true. Very true. John, very, very smart guy, obviously, with what he's built. So during that time, I was in corporate IT, then got out of that by running an agency, as you discussed. So because I was selling stuff online and getting good success, my first business was propertybooks.com.au. So I was selling books and courses about investment property, that kind of thing. And then my business partner at the time, John, and I, we did an exit there and we sold that. But I had a lot of business owners saying, hey, could you help me with that? And so that's why I morphed off into, running an agency. Ran an agency for many years and learned a lot. What was great about that was the speed learning of like working in so many different businesses. So that was awesome. Then morphed into more of a coaching role. And then now we do a model called Rainmaker Partner, where we partner with hero businesses and scale them up exponentially and just take a small piece of the gain. That's kind of what we've been doing. But you spoke about business models, and what we found is that there's, business really comes down to a couple main types of models. There's like a services business.
Yeah.
There's a information business. There's physical products, so e-com, Amazon, and then there's software as a service. And there's also local as well. And what we found is like the further you head towards one way, the more freedom you can create. So because really it all comes down to leverage. So a local business probably has the worst freedom, like the lowest level of freedom. Maybe worst is not the correct word. The lowest level of freedom. Then a services business really is the second worst as far as the second lowest as far as like level of freedom, because it doesn't matter what you do in a local business or in a services business. You can go above and beyond, but you can't keep everyone happy all the time. And also the reality is that sometimes you're limited by things like geography and stuff. You don't have as much leverage, or it might be about your own time or your team's time, but there's not as much leverage, and leverage really is the key. Info business is incredible from a product point of view. You might be able to build it once and sell it over and over again without having to redo that product. Obviously, certain times, things change in the industry and you have to keep doing that. So info can be amazing, but you've got to have something special, something different, otherwise there's a lot of people selling info and the price of info, can be going down, that kind of thing. So an example might be you sell certification with your info, or micro continuity also works well, like where it's an annual program, but you can get the price of the annual for just the cost of a couple of months. There's different ways of making info work.
And there's just one more question though, Greg, just with the info products though, you can also have products where you sell them as one-off in the form of, say, courses, or you can have a membership site, which I just recently launched.
Yes.
And that may have a continuity element in there where you may supplement the information with some form of coaching or support for which people pay an ongoing fee.
Yeah, that is a very good model. Whenever you can build that continuity that you spoke about, Ash, that's gold. And then there's e-commerce and Amazon. So I'd put Amazon in with that. Amazon really just is another type of e-commerce, but it's the biggest portal. Like if you look in the US, 51% of all online sales happen on Amazon.com. So it's it's just basically, when you get that right, it's like drinking from a fire hose. It really is incredible. And then the best business model of all I find is SaaS, so software as a service, because there's that saying that software is eating the world. If you can build a software as a service and then have your customers be using your service and they're dependent on it, and the software is then doing the delivery. Remember, like we spoke about the local business or the services business, it's you doing the delivery or your team. If you can have software, that's obviously very leveraged, bits and bytes. So info product, and like you said, membership, as well as e-commerce, Amazon, and SaaS. SaaS is ultimately the ultimate one. Those business models really can create a greater level of freedom. So the further I've moved towards the right, the more freedom that I've had in my life.
And software as a service is also a continuity play, because you pay a recurring fee for the software. And some great examples of continuity, both in information or entertainment, I should say, is classic example, Netflix. And we saw in Apple's recent announcement, 3 out of their 4 products they announced were continuity products. Apple News Plus, Apple TV Plus, and I can't remember the other 2. But software as a service typically follows that continuity model. In fact, Neil Patel, who I interviewed in the very first episode of this podcast, talked a little bit about that. And then I had Hiten Shah, I think it was episode 44, who talked about software as a service. And he's actually very good at that. In fact, he might be coming back on the show again. We're going to talk about his $1 billion mistake at some point in the future. He wrote a great article about it, which I recommend checking out. I might link to that in the show notes. So we've talked about the different levels of freedom. You've got your local business where you're exchanging time for money predominantly. Then you've got your services-based business where you're probably a little bit more at the premium end of the scale, but you're
Yep.
still kind of exchanging time for money. Then you've got your information products business, which you can distribute or deliver as a transactional sale where you sell a course or something, or you can have a continuity play where you sell a course, but then you offer some kind of ongoing recurring value. I remember Stu McLaren told me this. You can charge an ongoing recurring fee as long as you're offering ongoing recurring value. And so
Yes.
that's where the coaching aspect comes into a membership form. And then you've got the software as a service and the e-commerce style
Yes.
business, which
Yes.
is pretty much set and forget, provided you create the framework. Now, there is one challenge with software as a service, and I've seen this happen a lot, where you really have to make it to crack it, to make awesome software.
Yep.
One out of every 100 software creators end up making it. But then once you make it, you've
Yeah.
really made it. It's a little bit like being a rock star. Can you talk to us about that?
It is getting easier now with, like, previously if you were developing a software as a service, when your first money had to go into hosting and servers and all that kind of stuff. Whereas these days, there's amazing technologies like Amazon Web Services where they really do have a whole bunch of services and you can just bolt them on and then use whatever you need. But I
Right.
think, to do that software as a service, you really do need a little bit of the tech founder. You need to be able to understand the technical side as
Yes.
well as the sales, marketing, business founder. That's why, like, a lot of venture capital firms want two founders involved. I'm lucky. I'm doing a software as a service play now. We're working on in the early stages, but I'm lucky in that I've got a technical background and I'm a business and marketing type person. But so software as a service is amazing. Ecom also, but like you say, it does have that constraint if you really do need to understand that technical issues. Ecom also has a downside and a constraint, which is that as you grow, you continue have to invest in stock. So
I
every
was
time you
just
get
going to say
bigger,
that.
you
Inventory.
have to invest in more and more stock. So you can actually grow yourself broke with it, with e-commerce as well. So that's where you
Yes.
get into smart financing and all that kind of stuff. So e-com creates an amazing level of freedom, but especially during that growth stage, you've just got to make sure you have enough cash to keep going. That can
Yes.
be the only constraint with that.
And that's right. Growth has to be controlled and has to be done in a disciplined manner. Otherwise, the wheels can fall off and you may not even know it.
Yes.
Ezra Firestone did a great job. He grew from, I think, 5 to 25 million in 12 months, but I'm sure there was a lot of really disciplined monitoring of stock and inventory levels and cost of goods sold. Putting my accounting
Yeah.
hat on for a second here. But there was a lot of obviously discipline and rigor that would have gone into understanding the cash flow within the model.
Yeah, absolutely. And also that having multiple models complementing each other. So like Ezra, he was my e-commerce coach for a year. Very smart dude. He's got like software as a service. He's also got info product, that kind of
Boom.
stuff. So sometimes multiple of those things might be funding the growth and while the e-com.
Ah,
But the good thing about building an e-com or a SaaS as well is that it's not just really the day-to-day running of it. You're actually building a saleable asset. So
right.
you sometimes in some ways the most profitable thing can be at the end when you build to a big exit.
Yes, yes. And
But
I remember talking to Jeff Green about exits. It's very important to build a business which is saleable, even if you
yes,
don't plan to sell it, because when you build a business which can stand on its own without you as the founder, then it's more likely to have better quality systems and it's going to be easier to replicate within other areas in the globe. So if you have
yes.
an operation in Australia, you can potentially replicate it more easily in America
Well,
if you have good quality systems and a good model.
agreed. Well, like we were talking about with the e-com stuff, we started with my business partners and I. We started with the US in that case, even though I'm an Aussie,
Yeah,
just because it's 10 times the bigger market. So
right.
there's a thing about leverage with that. Sometimes the same marketing effort, but applied to a different business model or applied to a different market can get you a different result. So once you get it, because one of the things that I learned from Russell Brunson was like, once you get on a winner, sort of take the show on the road,
Yes.
roll it out into other regions. Whereas everyone always thinks I've got to find another winner, but sometimes you don't. Like we've got winners in the e-com space that we've now rolled out, through the US and then Canada and Mexico and all of Europe and Japan and Australia, what I mean, that kind of thing. Rather, we still are adding new products in, hopefully trying to find more new winners. but just take those winners and roll them out around the globe, because that's what's exciting. If you think back, traditional business, you set up a market stall or whatever, and your customers were whoever went past that day.
Yeah.
Whereas these days, you can hit the whole globe. It's an incredible time to be alive, and it's an incredible time to be an entrepreneur, I think.
So you've touched on something that will be very useful to my listeners, I think, and that is how to replicate success, particularly around marketing and sales, from one discipline or one business model to another. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and how you've used that to achieve the success that you have in the recent past?
Yeah, so I guess my background was a lot of services business, and in particular with the agency and stuff. But what I loved about that was speed dating. So I got to, by being an agency or by being a coach, I got to work in software as a service, and I got to work on Amazon's, and I'm the sort of guy they say, like, can you help me with this? I'd look at it and figure it out, and even if I've never done it before, I'm like, yeah, we can make that work, and then just scramble like crazy to make it work. So I kind of lucky in that I got to learn by working on other people's businesses, and then that whole success leaves clues. After a while, you start to see these traits come through, of what were successful business models or successful founders or CEOs, that kind of stuff. And it was out of that I really then started to work on, getting more e-com going. So what I found was that the average multimillionaire has multiple income streams. The worst number in business is one, because
okay.
if one thing falls over, then you lose a whole lot. So that's where I always try to build like a 3 or 4-legged stool. You can have this issue of energy units where you're just not giving anything enough energy to smash it out of the park. So there's definitely a balancing act, but generally it's good to have a couple of income streams. So say if this one brought in 10 grand a month, and that one brought in 5 grand a month, and that one brought in 5 grand a month in this hypothetical situation, you're at 20. And if one of those 5 grands all of a sudden dropped away for, Google changed the rules or Facebook did or whatever, then you've gone from 20 down to 15, rather than, lose everything, that kind of stuff. So that's why I have enjoyed having a little bit of e-com and a little bit of SaaS. And traditionally I've done a lot of services, but I'm probably not going to really do that much in the way of services moving forward, to be honest. Just not as leveraged as I want. I think everything from this point on will either be info, e-com, or SaaS. And then the other part of it is like business owners taking the money out of business and then focusing on investing, because I think a lot of business owners are guilty of just running the day-to-day of the business, but then not really thinking about, well, actually I need to be able to retire, say when I'm 65, 70, whatever the case is. Have I built a big enough golden goose that I'm going to then be able to live off the eggs of it without having to kill the goose, which is a different discussion altogether. But so I think after a while, learning investing as well as a business owner, it's kind of like the next evolution that you need to be able to do.
And that sort of ties into the idea that you want to build a business that you can sell, and not just sell, for break even. You want to build a business that you can sell that enable you to retire. So it closes the loop in a sense. We're talking about building something that is an asset. That's what I was looking for. Building a business that is an asset.
And I think you can have it all too, Ash. Like I feel that you can have freedom, like you can build a freedom and a lifestyle business, but also build something that can be sold. Certainly like what we're doing now. But I do get it, like, so as far as there'll be people listening who are earlier on in their journey, say they're still in the day job and they're trying to get out of it, or they've just got out of the day job. And at that point, you're really at the grind. You really just got to keep learning as fast as you can, implementing like crazy, that kind of thing. So this, like what we're talking about creating freedom and investing what's left and all that kind of stuff, might seem like it's a long way down the track, but it's good to know that that's possible. But initially, you've just really got to scramble like crazy, because one thing is, no one's going to do it for you. So, like how I said, I'm a 15-year overnight success.
Yes.
Heaps of people started at the same time as me, but most of them will quit.
Right.
So, really, I think that resilience, I actually don't think there's not really that much special about me. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not a dummy, but I wasn't the dux of the class or anything like that. Do you know what I mean? But what was special about me was I was willing to outwork the other guy. Or girl. I was willing to out-hustle, out-learn. When everyone else stopped learning, I kept going. And then when life kicked me in the guts, I just got up one more time after life kicked me in the guts and just kept going and going and going. So that resilience, and also that ability to say, hang on, this isn't working. We need to pivot. What's next? And I think next is one of the most important words in business. Do you know what I mean? Because if you're on a business model and it's just doesn't have the right level of leverage, you know what I mean, then you might need to say next. And because I found actually in your life as an entrepreneur, you might start off with a certain business model, and then after a while you realize, you listen to something like this, and then you realize, hang on a second, this doesn't really have much leverage. It's not really going to be a sellable asset. It's not getting me where I want to go. Keep doing it, right? But think about what is next and what is a smarter business model that I can move to. And like over our time from the day job to now, we've done those, 4 or 5 of those main pivots, and it's about constantly moving to a better, smarter, more leveraged business model, so that you can create that freedom. You can have, ultimately build that golden goose as well.
Cool. So let's talk about some really important takeaways from this conversation that our listeners can implement and actually get some results if they're looking to build a lifestyle. We touched on the different kinds of businesses, and we talked about the business that affords you the least freedom, which is your local business where you're typically exchanging time for money. And then we talked about the services-based businesses and the next progression. And then you've got your information businesses, which can be either recurring income based, where you're offering some kind of coaching to supplement that information, or a transactional information business where you're selling courses, that kind of thing. And then we talked about software as a service and e-commerce, where you're building an asset that pretty much sells itself or delivers a result without almost any intervention from you. And it's becoming increasingly easy these days with Amazon servers and so on. You also talked about the importance of having multiple income streams from all the people that you've worked with, and you've worked with many of them. The ones that have been the most successful have been able to kind of diversify their time and financial investments, but not do it to the point where they are too diluted, but equally do it so that if one business is suffering, then the successful business can kind of shore up that suffering business, at least for a period of time, but then also knowing when to cut your losses and to say, okay, this is not working, and pivot away from that. You also talked about the importance of persistence and spending your time in the trenches, and we've seen all sorts of successful people do that, including Steve Jobs, who had his second act after he was sacked from Apple. And when he became the CEO of Next, and Next did a reverse acquisition of Apple, and that's how he ended up becoming the CEO of Apple again, which may never ever happen again. But the point is, he spent years and years and years in the wilderness. So you have to be willing to do that. Maybe you'll be lucky and you won't have to do it, but be prepared for it. And then you also said something really valuable, I thought, which was keep asking yourself, what's next? That's an important question to ask. So that orients you a bit to the future and stops you from being myopically focused on the here and now. Yes, you need to be focused on the present, but you also need to be aware of the landscape and what's coming in the future. And another important question to ask is, am I single point sensitive? And the way you expressed that was, you said one of the worst words in businesses is the word one. So, one customer, one supplier, one business model. Those things, in your experience, can be quite limiting and can be the kiss of death.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was a great summary.
Cool. All right. So that was a great episode. Now, how do our listeners find out more about you, Greg? Is there anything else you'd like to add in this conversation? I mean, I look forward to having you back on again soon, where we'll be talking about more tactical stuff around e-commerce.
Yes.
But what would you like to talk about in terms of strategy? What advice can you give our listeners?
Yeah, so your first question was where can people find more info? I think if you go to rainmakerpartner.io, that's our main website, that has a blog on there. So between that and the collective.com.au blog, there's video training that goes on and on there's a lot of time you could spend there. That's just a great free training resource. I don't really have anything to sell these days, as far as what I'm doing. The other thing really is advertisingboost.com, which is soon to be called marketingboost.com. That's where we give away free vacation incentives for business owners. That's really going nuts. So that's kind of the main ways to find us. I think, what you summarized was just awesome. I think when it comes down from a business owner and entrepreneurial journey, it's basically like, where am I now? Where do I want to go? And then is it worth it? And so like, what's my why as to what I want to do? And the
Yeah.
why has to be greater than you. Like, so initially it might be about
Yes.
money and that kind of thing, but after a while you get to like a greater purpose. So like, for example, we do philanthropy and fund a school in India and all that kind of stuff. So there has to be a bigger why after a while. And like 100% of people want success, but maybe only 3% are willing to do what it takes to get there. So
Yeah.
you got to think about like, are you willing to do what it takes? And it's going to get tough at times, but if you keep picking yourself up, the ultimate prize is freedom. And like, what's the value on that? Like, so I think, go for it.
Yeah, Todd Herman talked about the importance of having a greater why in episode 176. Either he talked about it on the episode or in his book, which I highly recommend. It's called The Alter Ego Effect, and I found it very useful, particularly if you are struggling through that wilderness period, to be able to give yourself this alter ego, which you can kind of step into and not feel seduced or affected by what appears to be a failure. You can keep positioning yourself as the superhero in your mind without being deluded about it, and actually really activate your inner superhero to push past those really, really challenging times. And there will be many.
Yeah, I love that. That's great.
Okay, well, thank you very much for being on the episode, Greg, and I can't wait to have you back, where we'll be talking about more detailed, actionable secrets around building an e-commerce business that delivers epic results.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Greg.